All right. Hello. Good morning. Sorry I didn't post anything up last week. I got some very important feedback for my book that I'm working on right now, and I really wanted to just take some time to think through, plot out, and well, I ended up adding more into my zombie story, Fading Death, and I have a completely new prologue. And before I read the prologue and talk a little bit more about the change that I'm putting into my book, I just want to cover a little bit about some of the feedback that I got from some buddies of mine. Because I read the prologue to them and they had some questions of the story, and I asked them things like, is this the kind of story that you'd be interested in? Um, does the characters that are introduced in the prologue, is it easy to understand? Is it easy to follow? Does it feel like this is a real reaction to what's happening? Um, because the prologue, it's actually going to be covering essentially the day zero, the patient zero for the outbreak that happens in the United States for the zombie story. So um, yeah, like I've said before, if you're a fan of the video game Project Zomboid, then you'll definitely find something relatable here. Now, it's not that this story is set in the same time period as Project Zomboid, because my cousin did ask me that, because he and I played a lot of Zomboid together. But it's just more so a nod of just appreciation to Project Zomboid. So hopefully this camera doesn't get tilted or anything, because my dog is he got a little zoomies right now, so he's just biting a rubber wheel. Anyways, I'm gonna get right into it. So I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna read the prologue, and then I'm gonna talk a little bit about the chapters that I've added in after it, and how that fits into the overall story. So yeah, like I said, I'm gonna get right into it. Prologue, July 27th, 2000, Muldra, Kentucky, 20:04 local time. Arnold Vernon took a deep breath and tilted his head back. The sticky heat of the night lingered in the air. The echo of June bugs in the trees were only interrupted by cars driving down the road. He lifted his hat and wiped the sweat from his forehead. He needed a drink. He walked from the truck down the gravelly sidewalk towards Ziggy's bar. The orange sign on the door was stamped by the Kentucky Department of Public Health and had the mandatory curfew hours listed: 20:00 to 0600. It also prohibited gatherings of over 5 persons inside. The bell above him jingled, and he saw a familiar crowd. Earl and Big Mike sat at the bar, some dominoes and Miller Lights on the counter space. Deb, with her messy bun of thinning blonde gray hair, was on the other side of the counter, wiping a glass, looking up at the TV. A few others sat in the booths along the wall and nodded at him. At the end of the hall were two gentlemen. Judging by their clean-cut heads and in-shape physiques, they were probably off-duty servicemen from Fort Knox. "Arnie, how's it going?" Deb said, and wiped the counter spot he usually sat at. "Hey, Arnie." Earl nodded and took a sip of his beer. Arnold went to the end stool and felt exhausted. "You okay, pal?" Big Mike asked, adjusting himself on the stool to face Arnold. There was an awkward silence hanging in the air. The television report went on. CDC and WHO officials have raised the pandemic alert level to Phase 5 following clusters of severe respiratory failure in various Midwest states. In accordance with the executive order signed this morning, strict curfews are now federal mandates. Citizens are advised to remain indoors and report any symptoms of high fever, unresponsiveness, and possible aggression immediately. "Arnie, you okay, Hoss?" Deb carefully approached him, cracking open a Miller Lite and placing it in front of him. Earl and Big Mike leaned a little closer, to look at him. Just weary, Deb, Arnold rasped. His voice sounded like rocks being crushed by a heavy roller. He cleared his throat. Hauled a load up of poultry from Georgia. He looked at the TV with fatigued eyes. I need something to eat. Arnold took a sip of the beer and shook his head. Deb's face, Deb's face mask was slung around her wrist. She considered putting it on, but chose not to. How about a burger? She asked him. He nodded and took a deep breath to sit up straight. You got the Y2K bug? That bird flu? Earl said, slapping another domino onto the bar top. He took another swig of his own beer. Said something about a haul from Georgia? Poultry? Big Mike asked him. Yeah, Arnold said, straining to get the word out of his throat. He looked at the TV report and shook his head again. Stam bug. Maybe I did catch it, he said and reached for his beer. But he didn't take a sip this time. He just held it for a moment. Well, the computers didn't go all Terminator on us, so the government has to scare us with this bird flu nonsense, Big Mike said. He turned to face the two off duty officers who were looking curious at their direction. No offense. It ain't nonsense, Earl said, wiping his fingers on a greasy napkin. My cousin in Illinois said they got more National Guard roadblocks to set up. Same in Bama and other states. One of the patrons sitting in the booth chimed in. Earl looked toward the two officers at the pool tables. What do you make of it all, and this executive order that Bill signed? One of the men looked at the TV report for a moment. Haze of Marlboro cigarette smoke lingered near the pool tables. Guess it is more serious, he said, and looked at Arnold, who was just staring at his beer. Here, this should help you, Deb said, and slid a plate with the greasy burger and fries. Thanks, Deb, Arnold said and looked at the food. He managed to take another sip of his beer. Ha! Gotcha! Big Mike said and placed a winning domino down. Earl sighed. All right, I'll let you have that one, he said, raising his beer to concede the victory. You ain't in Louisville? Big Mike asked Arnold. Uh-huh, Arnold said and grabbed the French fry. Big Mike watched him with tense eyes as the fry trembled slightly in his grasp. He also noticed the glisten of sweat trickling along Arnold's head. Hey, maybe you should call it a night, Arnie. Get some rest, he said. Earl leaned back in to get a look. The same concern spread on his face, seeing the condition of Arnold. Arnold stared at the French fry. The voices around him sounded like he was at the bottom of a pool, trying to hear them. He blinked hard a few times and swallowed. His throat was dry, but it felt hot. A sudden wave of nausea was bubbling up in his head. He pushed himself off the bar and quickly ran for the restroom. The stool fell to the ground. Arnie! Deb was concerned, watching him bob his head like he was about to puke. Should we call an ambulance? Big Mike asked, hearing the door to the restroom close behind Arnold. The two officers were more alert. They set their beers down and looked pensive toward the bathroom door. They all heard it. Arnold was puking into the toilet. His heaving sounded like he was in pain. Damn, Earl said, shaking his head. Poor fella, Big Mike said and took a sip of his beer. He looked at the two officers who were standing closer now. Think he's sick? With that? Deb asked them, pointing her chin toward the TV screen. What do you think? One of the officers asked the other. They heard Arnold heave again. The sound of him throwing up into the toilet was just as loud. The cook peeked out from the kitchen window, shaking his head in annoyance. Inside the restroom, Arnold gripped the toilet seat with all his strength. His hands were trembling, as if he were freezing. But his head felt so hot. He looked into the toilet, and on his hands. It wasn't just his lunch from earlier that day. It was blood. He saw blood in the toilet, on the seat, on his hands, and on the floor. He stood up and shambled to the sink to wash his hands. There was a knock on the door. You all right in there, pal? It was one of the officers. Arnold stared at the sink, his vision blurred. He wasn't sure if he felt the water under his hands anymore. He wasn't sure where he was. Am I in Louisville already? Who was knocking? Who's that? He looked at his reflection in the mirror. His eyes looked so dark. He knew parts of his eyes were white. But where is it? Another low thud. was on the door, and a voice. The heat grew to a boiling point inside him. He wanted to scream. He wanted to express his pain, but he just stared at himself in the mirror. He jolted, stiffening his posture. He felt a hot spike burning at the back of his neck. As his vision blurred, the last thing he remembered was how aggressive the chickens were at the poultry site in Georgia. Arnie! The officer at the door shouted. He listened. He heard the water of the sink running. He looked back to the others, a look of worry growing on his face. His partner unclipped the holster of his sidearm just in case. Arnold, I'm opening the door. Talk to me, he said, turning the knob. As the door opened, a stench unlike anything he had smelled before smacked him head on. He coughed hard. His own vision spun for a second. The others in the bar also smelled it and had similar reactions. Before he stepped inside of the restroom, someone tackled him. It wasn't a tackle. Before the officer could realize what was happening, he felt a sharp squeeze that turned into a skin piercing pinch. His neck was being bitten by Arnold Vernon. What the fuck? Earl shouted and fell off his stool, coughing from the odor. Deb recoiled in panic. The other officer rushed over and grabbed Arnold by the belt to drag him off of his partner. The weary 54-year-old truck driver, known as Arnold Vernon, had become something like a feral animal. Arnold turned towards the officer grabbing him and sunk his teeth into his exposed arm. The bar panicked. The patrons in the booth backed up as far as they could and watched in horror as an officer lay on the floor, coughing up blood. He was wheezing, trying to say something, but it was happening so fast. Big Mike fell off his stool onto the ground. Arnold and the other officer stumbled and tripped over him. Hey, are you okay? What the hell? Earl froze when he saw the bite wound on the officer's neck. He looked back at the scuffle between Arnold and the other officer. Call 911! He shouted, looking at Deb. Deb was frozen, her lips trembling from the sight. Damn it, Deb, where's the Earl grunted in pain. The officer on the floor grabbed his leg and bit his shin. Earl felt teeth puncture his skin and sink into the muscle, ripping out a portion. He fell in agony. He lay there for a moment. The door opened and someone ran out. He felt a hot spike of heat and pain surge up his body, and then he jolted. The cook came out of the kitchen holding a cast iron pan. He had no idea what to strike or who. 5 men lay on the ground. Help me! Big Mike shouted, trying to get himself off the ground. He was a heavy man, struggling to push himself up. The cook grabbed his hand to haul him, but Arnold lunged at him. The officer he had bit on the arm was convulsing on the floor, coughing up blood. The cast iron pan clanked heavy on the ground. The chef looked as Arnold's teeth locked onto his arm. The whites of Arnold's eyes were gone. An inky black filled the irises. Then he felt another hot sting of flesh. It was Earl. Despite the chunk of flesh that was bitten off his leg, he now returned the gesture to the cook. Deb ran out of the kitchen into the muggy July night. Help! She cried. Help! Anyone! Call 911! She ran towards the streetlight and stumbled, coughing up a little bit of blood. She stared at the blood she had spilled onto the pavement. Her hands shook. She wanted to throw up. She heard glass break, and the scuffle inside the bar sounded like an animal exhibit gone mad. She pushed herself up from the ground. It was only then she realized her knees were both bleeding from the impact she had against the pavement, but she didn't feel anything. Her heart pumped rapidly in her chest. Please, she mumbled, waving towards a car in the distance. As the lights of the car approached and slowed down, she felt a sudden jolt in her body, and her vision blurred. A man got out of the car. He was shouting something towards her. Deb saw a few more shadows run past her and jump the man in the car. They were screaming. There was a hot spike of pain at the back of her neck, and her vision faded away. Ziggy's bar was a bloodied mess. Big Mike lay on the floor, wheezing, blood leaking out of his neck, his torso, and his thigh. The screams outside were overpowered by the collision of a vehicle. He listened to the TV that was still on. Officials urge calm, follow government mandates, adhere to social distancing. The situation is under control. And that's it. That's the end of the prologue. So I kind of wanted to capture this chaotic patient zero moment in Moldra, Kentucky. And if anybody's a fan of Project Zomboid, we're all very familiar with Moldra and what can happen there. So if you listen to the whole prologue, I appreciate it. If you want to give any feedback, if anything of the prologue felt too rushed or just difficult to pay attention to, I would appreciate your feedback about it. It means a lot. And so the chapters that follow now, I added in 11 new chapters. And these chapters pretty much follow all the main characters throughout the story and how they're reacting and what they're doing in these day one, day two, day three, up to the first week of what's happening now across the country and the world. Um, and, you know, I'm trying to do as much of the exposition explained through dialogue. So like CDC reports that come in, because one of the characters is a doctor with the CDC. Another character is a military contractor with the CIA, and he's kind of like he's chapter one, because when you kind of think about who is going to be responding and reacting first, of course it's going to be the government as soon as they realize the sincerity of what's happening, and it just kind of follows the other characters and mostly focusing on the ones that are in Boston, and then the last character it shows is the ranger in Acadia National Park, and it just transitions right into the rest of the story that I had already written. So I really wanted to include these kind of hectic day one, day zero moments, uh, just to just to make the stakes of these characters better understood and what they're fighting to survive for, and throughout the rest of the story. And I feel like it does a better job of making that have more impact and value for some of the characters, especially because we see what they had to sacrifice to be able to survive and help others, and that's kind of the foundation of going into this zombie story. So I really hope you liked it. I hope you enjoyed it. Yeah, I've just been busy, so I'm in the process of just finishing up these chapters, adding them in, and then I want to get some quotes from an editor to be able to give it their professional review. There's two editors that I have in mind that I found on TikTok, that I want to reach out to. So that's where we are. So I haven't worked on my other book at the moment because I really want to get this zombie story, Fading Death, to a place that's ready for this. And when I finished the main manuscript, it was at 87,900 words. It's now currently at 101,000. So it's going to be a little bit more, and that's okay because I'd much rather care about telling the story than about the word count. So I hope you enjoyed it. And if you're out there, if you're writing, if you're still working through your first draft, or if you are interested in learning more about this story that I've written, and if you're writing a book and would like some feedback from me, I'm happy to do some kind of interchange with our manuscripts as beta readers. So let me know if you're interested. I'm willing to do that kind of thing because that feedback means a lot, especially if we're in similar genres and similar tones for our stories. I think that just helps a lot. So um, yeah, I hope you enjoyed this one. Have a great rest of the weekend. Thank you. Bye bye. Oi, babas.